Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to The Collision. Daniel here, and Disenchanted, a sequel of 15 years in the making, just dropped on Disney+. I've seen it, so let's talk about it. Well, in the fairy tale world, no one gets sick, everyone's always in perfect health all the time. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said about the real world. As you can probably tell, I'm sick, it's that time of year. But Disenchanted was a movie that I think a lot of people were anticipating. The first one doesn't get talked about a whole lot, and some of it's been so long, since 2007 when Enchanted kind of first dropped. So this is sort of fallen out of the conversation a little bit, but Enchanted, the original one, it dropped in 2007, was almost universally enjoyed and liked. It was kind of a fresh take on sort of the fairy tale thing, kind of before that became popular to do, and to do different spins and some of that. And it was kind of both like a kind of a charming ode to like the classic Disney films, which is both sort of like a tongue-in-cheek, loving spoof to the films, but also just like a celebration of those tropes. And although it kind of poked fun at like the cliches of the fairy tale stories, it essentially ended on one of those cliches, with the characters sort of finding true love and having their happily ever after. Well, Disenchanted kind of picks up 15 years later and kind of looks at what happens after that? What happens after the happily ever after? What happens to those characters? And Disenchanted kind of flips the switch from the original. The original Enchanted kind of told the story of like a fish out of water story of the Disney princess. What happened if she was in the real world of New York and it's live action? Where Disenchanted almost has the opposite of that. Of it more imagines like, what if our real world was like we all behaved and acted like this is sort of a fairy tale world, and characters broke into songs, almost like we were living out a Disney story, not like the one character, but like the whole world. And the story kind of starts a little glum. Like the first 35 or so minutes of this thing is more like establishing, like kind of reconnecting with the characters. And don't worry if you haven't seen the movie like I haven't, since the original dropped 15 years ago. This movie does start with like a summary of what happened and kind of catches you up to speed with that movie. But it starts by kind of checking in with these characters and kind of showing how like the happily ever after, sort of their blissful kind of true love and stuff, how that's over the years now morphed into like this exhaustion and like the grind of like parenting and teenage drama and like work, some monotony, and even for like the princess, sort of the novelty of like the real world and stuff has kind of worn off, and she's kind of longing to return back to that like that blissful sort of happy ending that they had. And I just sort of lost a lot of sort of the joy of life. And I don't want to get into all the plot, but one thing leads to another. Magic wands are found, there's spells, and kind of transforms the world into, and to kind of reflect sort of that fairy tale that she longs for and imagines. And really it's kind of from that point that the film, like about 35 minutes in, that it starts to kind of build some energy and kind of have more fun with the premise, while the first sort of 35 minutes are mostly just sort of establishing and kind of slow and a little more almost like cynical and kind of dreary than kind of the rest of the film. And we'll kind of get into it. Like overall, this is not a bad film. And I'll kind of look at some of the positives, but I do think that sort of the title, Disenchanted, kind of works on a fitting meta level. All the same kind of elements that worked for the original are back, and there are definitely some like fun moments and stuff that they have with it's just such a glorious premise to have, and they do have some fun with it. But the problem is the film just never seems to kind of, as a whole, recapture any of the magic that the first one had. Kind of most aspects of this film kind of end up falling in that kind of category of like good, but could be better or has been done better before. Like the first one, this is a musical, so there's lots of songs in it, and all the songs are okay, but like none of them are memorable. Like I even can't remember any of the big songs, even just a couple hours after watching the movie. Kind of also like the first one, there's the blend of sort of 2D animation and live action, like the Roger Rabbit kind of stuff, which worked well in the first movie. It's still cool to see that in this movie, although it's really only contained briefly to the very end of this film, and kind of because of the context and what's going on in the story, sort of the vibrant kind of cartoon world isn't the vibrant world that we remember from the first movie, so it just doesn't pop as much as maybe it did the first time. And like I said, like the concept, sort of the real reality as a fairy tale is an amusing thing, and like even particularly I think like Patrick Dempsey is in this once again, and he sort of becomes this like swashbuckling prince that's out looking for adventure. That's the reason I got a kick out of seeing that. But this is almost a 2-hour movie, and it feels about 20 minutes too long. It sort of overstays its welcome, even though the premise is kind of amusing. By the end of it, it sort of loses some of that charm, and I think the acting is mostly good. I think Maya Rudolph is sort of cast as like the evil queen in this. I think she is miscast. For Amy Adams, like the first Enchanted movie was really the film that kind of put her on the map as like a big bankable kind of A-list Hollywood star, and she's gone on to do a bunch of stuff since then. And she's kind of slips sort of effortlessly back into the role. She's great again, although part of the story in this, she sort of takes I don't want to spoil any of the plot points, but kind of takes a bit more of like a villainous turn for a lot of this film. And while as an idea it works and it's consistent and it's interesting, sort of the more sinister version of her princess just isn't as fun as sort of the kind of the bubbling, sort of bursting, optimistic, cheerful, break into song princess, which really was like I think like the beating heart of the first one. And because of that decision to kind of do different stuff with her character, you kind of lose some of that energy that she brought to the original Enchanted. As far as content to consider, kind of things on the surface of this, there's really not a whole lot in this movie. Profanity. There's one character, one of the first lines actually in the whole movie says like "what the hell" or "what the hell." It kind of uses that, and there's also multiple uses later where characters kind of say "what the heck." There's a couple like OMGs, or a character kind of says "my God" later in the film. But other than that, this is sort of like a handful maybe of like rude words where characters say like, "it sucked" or "I hate this," or just sort of wording that maybe you don't want your kids saying, but they're not necessarily like profanity or swears. Violence. There's no violence. And this sexuality, really no sexuality in this. There's kind of a moment where the princess is like kind of commenting that dresses and like fashion isn't as modest as it used to be when she was a girl, and she kind of covers herself and kind of thinks that her own dress is too low cut, although in kind of relatively speaking, is really not, and there's nothing to be concerned with that. And kind of maybe another category that doesn't fit into those is just, as might be expected, magic. This is a fairy tale. There's obviously a lot of magic that goes on in this. Even this, like the magical land and like the characters themselves, the inhabitants, are literally like made of magic. So you get the magic, and one of the big plot points in this revolves around like a magic wand, like a wishing wand that allows people to kind of make their wishes come true. And then kind of the evil queen. And she's not really portrayed necessarily as like a sorceress, but she can just do magic, and which mostly consists of like kind of shooting like purple electricity or power or energy or whatever you want to call it, kind of out of her hands. She doesn't really do anything with that, but she kind of battles and stuff later in the film. So again, I didn't find that problematic as a Christian. It's consistent with sort of just that fairy tale kind of storytelling. But I know some Christians have an issue with magic, so just be aware of that as well. As far as things kind of going on beneath the surface, I think the main kind of overarching theme of this whole movie is kind of embracing life as it is, not as maybe you wish it were. And kind of what at the start of the movie, one of the characters, a cartoon mouse or chipmunk, is talking and says, "There is no after, happily ever after. You just get married, and then nothing else ever happens to you again." And obviously this story is kind of the answer to that. I think as long as fairy tales have existed, there's sort of being grumpy people and cynical people that are quick to point out that that's not how the real world works. And, it doesn't just sort of end there. Life happens, and life isn't always fun. And so this movie kind of fills that kind of narrative gap where the princess kind of is longing for the past, the thing that she knows, the thing that's familiar, sort of the unchanging. Like in Ecclesiastes, the Bible talks about how there's like a season for everything, and everything is beautiful in its time. And that's kind of her struggle, is not being able to see the beauty in the current season, and kind of using like the magic wand to try and sort of morph the world back to how she wanted it. And obviously throughout her journey, she kind of learns that, hey, she can't cling on to the past. It's not healthy for her. It's not healthy for those around her. And kind of to the end of the film, as she's sort of one of the closing songs, she says, and through here in reality, my ever after may not be at every moment happily. it's even more enchanted. And kind of, I guess, the verse that would kind of mind Philippians 4:12, where the Apostle Paul kind of says, "Hey, in all circumstances, I've learned to be content, the good and the bad." And really, that's kind of what's echoed throughout this film is, hey, that there is sort of enchantment, there is sort of that fairy tale wonder in our own circumstances and kind of whatever's happening, that she can appreciate, having a family and where she is, and things change. Things don't always need to be the same. So although obviously the film itself is not trying to give a Sunday school lesson on that, I think as Christians there's definitely some kind of biblical messages that we can kind of apply to this. So in the end, Disenchanted is not a bad film by any means, and I think too, just because it is a straight to streaming, kind of straight to Disney Plus movie, maybe the expectations, like what it needs to hit, doesn't need to be quite as high, because I do think it offers enough enjoyment and just sort of fun moments that, hey, if you just have time on, you have Disney Plus, and I think it is a wholesome enough movie that you can watch it with your family, not have to be concerned about dangerous ideologies and stuff. So I do think it delivers enough to kind of be a passable movie. Although I do think it's, like I mentioned, family audiences. I don't think there's any content necessarily that would make it problematic for younger viewers. But I do question maybe this the target audience of this. I think it functions more as a commentary on fairy tales rather than trying to be a fairy tale itself. It almost is more aimed at people that enjoyed the original or grew up with these things, rather than trying to appeal to new audiences, because essentially a lot of the thematic stuff in this is this character's working through midlife crises, that the kind of themes that children like to deal with, and there just isn't a whole lot of the cute charming animal sidekicks or things to appeal directly as kids. So I don't know. I think kids will. There's enough for kids to enjoy it. I just don't see all that many kids being really captivated or enchanted by this film. But hey, let me know if you guys check this out. If you guys watch this with your family, love to have a conversation. Hear what you guys think. If it if it lived up to kind of the long wait, was it worth it, or were you expecting more from this movie? And kind of hoped it would do something different. Would love to have that conversation with you guys. If you haven't done so, I encourage you, subscribe to our channel. We got a lot of other reviews and live streams and stuff. We'd just love to have you be a collider, join with what we're doing here. But most of all, guys, thanks for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.